Greetings and konnichiwa, and welcome to the Onyx Tavern. This is your host, the Barkeep, bringing you podcast 43 here at the Tavern, presented by Hirotaku.com. And after the long holiday break, look who's back with me.
Well, I'm back doing an in-person thing, but on the last one, I was still there. It was just over Skype. But
Yes, Raptor is back, and before we actually go ahead and start our spring semester next week, we decided to get another video in for you guys. And Raptor, I think today we're going to have a rather polarizing discussion, or at least polarizing as I understand it.
Just based on the discussion we were having beforehand, yeah, it sounds like this will be pretty polarizing, but
yes.
Proceed.
So basically, here's what I've understood from the Sentai fandom. Now, as we know in Power Rangers, it is pretty much all the same universe, with the exception of RPM, which is established as a separate universe.
Yes.
Sentai counters, and a lot of people believe that each Sentai series is its own universe,
Mm-hmm.
and then you have a second timeline, I guess you would call it, of the crossover movies, where there is a universe in which all the Sentai teams exist together, and they cross over. And it is in that universe that the Gokaiger exist, which is how they have all the powers and so forth, basically. And of course, if you want to count Keeper Ranger, which would be a third parallel timeline.
Yep.
So basically, what we want to go ahead and talk about is it right or is it wise to have these three timelines, or really should Sentai be one full timeline? Because the reason I ask this, Raptor, is that so many people want to bend over backwards to say, it's separate, deal with it, and yet you have the specials, which are counted as continuity to a lot of people, including myself.
Mm-hmm.
We have Gokaiger, which is canonical with the series.
With everything, yeah.
Yes. And they make the assumption that they all exist in the same universe, but the main shows, the other shows, don't exist in the same universe. So I'm a little confused by the whole thing. Tell me what you think is really happening. Is it three different timelines? Is it one timeline? How do you feel about that?
You know, there could be three timelines, or we could insinuate that every single Versus movie is its own continuity. I mean, granted, it makes the continuity of Gokaiger easier to reconcile if you say that, if you insinuate that it's just two main continuities, But the way I see it, I know you disagree here, but I prefer they stay separate. The reason being is that Super Sentai has a very long and diverse history.
Yes.
Each Sentai series has its own universe, its own history, and to try to reconcile them all being together would be a nightmare.
Now let's bring up that question, because Gokaiger basically says they all do exist. And we don't really experience any problems in either storytelling or factual information or anything within Gokaiger, because everything seems to flow. Now, from the Sentai I've seen, it all makes sense. They pick up where they left off. There isn't... I would argue that there is no major continuity gaps. Now, I'm not familiar with the older Sentai, so I wouldn't be able to say to that effect, but I would say everything Gokaiger since is accurate. That there isn't anything that makes me go, that's wrong.
Right, but the Gokaiger integration of the characters is limited. Most of the time, whenever the history is brought up, you'll have a character show up and they'll just be doing stuff in the present. However, it doesn't deal with the fact that it would be very difficult to reconcile the ancient history, the contemporary history of all of these teams if they were to exist together. Now,
but my question remains, why does Gokaiger get away with it, but the other series do not? So let me put it this way: Raptor, you've been watching a lot of Jetman this entire time.
I've got 2 episodes left right now.
Okay, and what was another full series that you saw? Another
Gokaiger.
Gokaiger. Okay, let's not use Gokaiger because that's our starting point. Let's take, you've seen Kyoryuger. Okay?
Yeah.
So let's take Jetman and Kyoryuger. Is there any reason why those two series could not exist?
Okay.
Given that there are different times in history, of course, but is there any reason why they could not?
Okay, I think that's a bad example.
Okay.
Because there are not really any issues with those two because there's nothing to clash. Okay? The Kyoryugers are fighting ancient, demonic, I don't know if you want to call that, but...
Well, they're space aliens, actually.
Ancient space aliens that killed the dinosaurs.
Yes.
And they've been around for millions of years. Cool, whatever.
Yeah.
Fight. The Jetmen were fighting invaders from another dimension.
Yes.
Who were making their first trip to Earth.
Yes.
So the mythologies don't clash. So really there would be no issue.
Yeah, now I have a major example we're going to bring up here in a minute.
Mm-hmm.
But my point is that...
It wouldn't be a problem, yeah.
Yeah, it wouldn't be a problem in that instance. But then if we add, okay, let's add the Geki Ranger mythology in there. Does that clash? Does that have anything? The idea is you have to keep adding in there and see if there's any major clashes. And I would argue that why does it work in Gokaiger that there are no clashes, but in the main continuity that there are clashes? And let's bring up the main example. And this is what we talked about before. The extinction event for the dinosaurs.
So if we were to accept all Super Sentai series in the same continuity, there would be an issue because the 3 dinosaur-themed Sentai series have all presented a different version of how the dinosaurs went extinct.
Now let's also make a disclaimer right here before we move on. The Kyoryuger Go Buster crossover has not happened, which is the alliance of the 3 dinosaur teams. And I would hope that there might be some explanation in there to explain that, but since that has not come out, that's not going to factor into any of our decisions. We're just going to come based on the information that we have from the 3 series. So that I just want to kind of get that out of the way because maybe by the time this airs, new information will be out about the crossover, because crossover comes out this month, right? January?
Yeah, they usually have this when it usually comes out.
Yeah, but I just, again, want to make that point. But go ahead with your point. I'm sorry.
Yes. So, yes, and Gokaiger had the 2 dinosaur teams.
Yes.
They each had characters make appearances.
Yes.
But Gokaiger didn't dig any deeper. The Gokaigers did not deal with the mythology surrounding Abaranger, and it didn't deal with the mythology surrounding Zyuranger.
But would you agree that because of their existence within the same universe, that they can coexist without any type of temporal paradox or whatever you want to call it? Because
I would say that they can't exist in the same universe, and that Gokaiger gets a pass because I enjoyed it.
and I want to stray from the simplicity of that. I mean, I understand that that's what a lot of people want to go ahead and believe, but let's be honest, you and I are both film students, we're both Japanese minors and all that, and we have taken a lot of literature classes, and we know that there is a lot that goes into literature, whether it's intentional or not. And I don't want to skip over this thing and just wave it off with a magic wand that just because A doesn't go to B in a neat line, then we can say, oh, different timeline. It's a lot like Enterprise in Star Trek. Raptor, have you seen Enterprise or know anything about it?
I know about it. I haven't watched it.
Okay,
sure.
So basically, up until Enterprise, everything was going in straight continuity. Original series, then 100-some years later, Next Gen, DS9, Voyager concurrently. Yeah. Enterprise was a prequel series, which had, in its start, and it pretty much its whole run, continuity errors. So, for example, the first contact with the Ferengi was at with Picard and the Stargazer. Okay, when he invented the Picard maneuver, that was the first contact between the two.
And then they showed up in Enterprise.
Exactly, they showed up in Enterprise, and of course the whole thing was like, well, they never mentioned that they were Ferengi; they were just marauders and all that.
They were just there.
Yeah, they were just there, which you can forgive it. You can look at any way that you want.
That sounds like bending over backwards to avoid an error.
But the problem a lot of people said is because of those continuity errors, that Enterprise should be considered completely different timeline. It's not the same as Picard, Cisco, and all that. This is a new universe, much like what the Abrams films are. Now, to be fair, Abrams' universe is a brand new universe, and they've established that. They say, yes, this is a different timeline.
Because of the Divergent point, you could totally argue that Enterprise is part of the Abrams universe.
But the point being is there were so many issues that they say, oh, well, Enterprise is nothing but a holodeck series, or this is an alternate timeline. It can't fit in. But official continuity says it does fit in, and there are numerous reasons why it does fit in, and it is established as a main part of the series.
Well, just a little aside for tiny details.
Yeah.
I like the time ripple formula used in DC. Basically, that going back in time and changing things not only changes the thing you do, but sends ripples.
Oh, Flashpoint.
Yeah, Flashpoint. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I saw the movie. Didn't read the comic, but I am familiar with what you mean. Clark lands in Metropolis. Bruce Wayne dies and all that.
So to explain this concept for listeners, Flashpoint paradox. I don't know about the comics so much, but I saw the movie. It uses the idea that changing the past not only changes the specific event that you targeted, but that sends ripples out through time and changes things that happened before the event you changed and things that happened after.
Yeah.
So the Flash goes back in time to save his mother from being murdered. However, he sends out time ripples to change events that happened before his mother was murdered. So it changes Batman's origin so that Thomas Wayne survives instead of Bruce Wayne.
And Martha Wayne becomes a Joker, which I really wish they would explore that in the movie.
I think it was explored in the comics.
Yeah, I know, so I might have to start reading comics. Okay, but back to the original point, because I think Enterprise and Flashpoint Paradox prove good points here. But my thing is that a lot of fans don't want to do that extra work to make them fit in, that they want to say, oh, it's separate just because this doesn't lead here. And let's go back to our example of the two dinosaur teams. And let's forget
three.
Well, yeah. Let's forget Key Ranger for the moment. Let's take a look at Zoo Ranger and Aber Ranger. Now, Zoo Ranger, the explanation was that Witch Pandora made a deal with Dice Satan to kill the dinosaurs.
Yes.
And Aber Ranger, what was the story there? I'm not too familiar with Aber Ranger.
I forget the name of the villains, but the villains killed them.
Okay. Now, Zoo Ranger, from all my knowledge, I've seen a lot of episodes, but I haven't seen the entire series, so if I'm missing something, I apologize for that right now. But to my understanding, they never actually showed a clip of Dice Satan, killing them, or even if they did show them, it wasn't like the entire planet.
Yes.
It's entirely possible that the Aber Ranger villains...
We'll just say that.
Yeah, that the Aber Ranger villains were tools used by Dice Satan in which to kill the dinosaurs. That they were part of it, but unseen. It's a retcon that the Aber villains were part of this, basically.
Okay, so all right, everyone, I was wrong about the Zoo Rangers. I mean, about the Aber Rangers. The dinosaurs were killed by a meteor, as, in real life.
Yes.
So, yeah, the dinosaurs...
And that opened up the two dimensions to the dinosaur world and all that, right?
Yes.
Okay, but still... One could argue, as far as retcon is concerned, that was a tool of Dice Satan to create...
So you would make the argument that Dice Satan could have brought the asteroid to Earth.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. Because it's not specifically stated how Dice Satan killed all the dinosaurs in Zoo Ranger or explicitly shown. And it's left open to interpretation, of course, for things like this. And let's count Zoo Ranger now. Kyoryuger at the moment. Dibos, which is an alien invasion from space.
Killed the dinosaurs.
Who's to say that they weren't on that asteroid or the meteor that came in, or they were completely separate? Because, heck, if you're going to kill something, you might use 6 different guns instead of just one gun.
Okay,
you know what I'm saying? And I know what you're thinking, but I'm just saying is that if you are a writer who's going to do these stories, retcon is part of what you do for comics, because you want to tell certain stories that can't be told without going back and changing information that's not been seen or fully explained. And I believe that's what's happening in Sentai, to where I do count it as one whole universe, but we have to retcon every now and then.
Okay, so, all right, my problem with retcons.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not as I don't care about as much in comics, but I don't like it in Sentai because that is creating more problems for the writers. That's something that they have to think about, something they have to, keep fact checking, and sometimes in an attempt to avoid a continuity error, you can create another one. And it limits the freedom of each Sentai to be its own being. So let's return to the dinosaur teams. That seems to be the central.
It's the easiest one, particularly because, again, none of us watched really any Sentai prior to 92. So
plus, they all have a different version of one of the most significant events in the history of planet Earth.
Exactly.
So, all right, so think about this. So imagine this, you are a writer for Abba Ranger. Okay. You have your cool idea about how you want to split, about how you want to have an alternate universe of dinosaurs still alive.
Yeah. Which
totally ripped off the Super Mario Brothers movie.
Yes.
Wow, that is weird.
Yes.
Didn't have that thought until now. I was watching Abba Ranger for a while. Anyways, so you're all of a sudden you're being told, no, you can't do that. You have to finagle that with the Zoo Ranger origin story. So you have to create extra work and probably create extra footage to say, we have this asteroid that killed the dinosaurs because it was used by Great Satan when he struck a deal with the witch Pandora. And it's just...
I wouldn't necessarily say...
And on top of that, the core audience would not care.
First of all, let's change that to intended audience.
The intended audience would not care. And that's a good distinction. Explain the distinction here.
Yeah, just quickly, and then let me get to my points. Like, intended audience is who they're making the show for, or they assume is going to go ahead and watch it. The core audience is who is watching it. And whether they want to believe it or not, there's a good majority of adults and teens watching Sentai, as well as Americans watching the series as well. Here's my counter to what you just said.
Yes, sure.
All right, so we're in the writer's room for Abba Ranger, and we want to do a dinosaur thing. We want to make an alternate dimension of dinosaurs to fit in with the overall story that we want to go ahead and do. Isn't it part of being a writer supposed to figure out problems to tell your story? If somebody says, well, we already killed the dinosaurs in Zoo Ranger 10 years prior, and this is how we did it, then your job as a writer is to find a creative way to still tell your story, but fit into the context that you have. Because I don't see it as being an issue if I want to have a separate universe of dinosaurs, that I can't have the Dice Satan thing in the background and still want to try and tell my story. Unless my story is... Dice Satan never existed, and the snow monster killed all the dinosaurs. That's when you have a problem, when you make explicit reference that contradicts previous established things. But Abba Ranger, from what I've been able to read and what you've told me, does not make a direct contradiction to Zoo Ranger.
Only if you use that technicality that you specified. You specified that it was that Dice Satan's... extinction of the dinosaurs, genocide, was never depicted. Now, I'm putting that you're looking at this from the perspective of someone who is a fan of all of Sentai. Now, consider that you are a writer who, I'm going to put this in terms you can understand.
Okay.
You are being put onto the writing staff for the next Doctor Who.
Okay.
Season.
Okay.
And, maybe this isn't as good. And you have a cool idea for a story. However, someone comes up and tells you that you have to alter your story idea because that contradicts a minor detail in a story done 20 years ago.
Well, this might be just my personal viewpoint in the way I approach story writing and screenwriting. Is if I ever get a job writing for anything, I believe that I owe it to not only the audience, the fan base, and my bosses to understand the material before I write.
Before you contribute.
I believe that's what you should go ahead and do. Unless you're starting a new franchise where you don't have pre-established continuity. Because if I was going to write for My Little Pony, I think I should at least watch the episodes. Otherwise, the bronies will be after me. Okay?
Oh, they'll be after you. They'll be after you anyway.
Yeah.
They'll find minor things wrong with your episode. But then again,
but and to continue that as well. I mean, you have to do that research. And if they say, well, this interferes with it, then you have to. Just like you accept criticism, you have to accept that you have to change things in your story to make it better work, to better fit. Mm-hmm. And again, I know it's a hypothetical situation, but that's just how I feel that I would approach such a thing. Because if it's not going to work because of established continuity, then I need to find a different way to go ahead and do it. Because it's almost like doing, like as in some SF Debris did give a great example. Or was it Linkar? I forget. Somebody gave a great example where it's like the new season of 24 is about Jack Bauer stopping the election of the first black president ever. Whereas in the very first season, it was about saving the life of the first black president ever. You are sacrificing continuity for storytelling to tell a good story, yes, but it just doesn't mesh. And that's I think that's where we're having this big issue right here, is when it comes to the context of story. Now I'm gonna
one other thing that I would put forth in this debate, that Sentai by its very design is created to be self-contained with occasional references, usually versus movies, to the other franchises. It is intentionally designed to be independent from the previous season. And that allows the flexibility of having, one season be about people who use the power of birds to fight against invaders from another dimension 1 year, and then have people frozen in time from the age of the dinosaurs fight against an ancient witch the next season, and then have people using Chinese martial arts to fight demons the season after that.
Yeah, and that stuff is great, but let's also point out there's a difference between being independent and being completely separated from the rest of reality. Because a lot of these stories do work. I mean, again, we haven't found, other than the dinosaur example, I can't think of any other time in which continuity completely overlaps each other, creates a big contradiction. Now, we probably find that in Power Rangers more often than not.
But Power Rangers makes a point to maintain the continuity.
Exactly.
While Sentai does not make the point.
Yeah, and those are two separate things overall. But I think ultimately what we're looking at here, and I think what the ultimate problem is that, I guess the way I look at it is that people who always want to argue multiple timelines are either A, unsatisfied with whatever the program is that they're seeing and don't want it to count.
Don't want it to be in the same universe as something they like.
And I'm guilty of that. I will completely agree that I'm guilty with that. Because RPM, I hate RPM. I had to accept it for a long time that RPM was part of the Power Rangers universe.
But then Samurai came along and established it as an alternate universe, so you happily accepted it.
Exactly, and it made me feel more comfortable. Yes, they're going to have crossovers, yes, they're going to come back, but it makes me feel better about it because I was so detested to the actual series. But for me to go ahead and say, before we got the Samurai thing, saying, RPM takes place in a different universe, so it doesn't count. That's me being lazy, that's me being arrogant, that's me being who knows what, just because I didn't like it. And there are a lot of people who are like that with, again, Enterprise was a good example of that. And people will take the last episode of Enterprise and say, well, it was a holodeck story the entire time. And won't ever count it, won't ever consider it. And I think there are people who are like that with Sentai, that they just don't like certain seasons, they want them to be completely separate. Some of the most hated ones, or the ones I hear are really bad, are like, there are people who don't like Zoo Ranger for some reason. O-Ranger,
it's kid focused.
Yeah, O-Ranger, I'm told, people didn't like, and I think there's a couple people who didn't like Go Onger.
And there are people that don't like Car Ranger.
Yeah, I mean,
I think Car Ranger.
And again, and there are people who will separate that because they don't like it. So that's my first problem there. And of course, the second one is that it's just being lazy sometimes to say that it's separate.
Right. And okay, finish your thought.
Yeah, and just I think ultimately what it comes down to is I will believe what Toei says. If Toei says all their Sentai series are made up of 3, 4, however many timelines, then I will accept it because that is the creator saying this is what it is, this is definitive. But until they say that, I'm not going to go ahead and be lazy about it or dejected because I don't like it. It's like with you like Akiba Ranger, they've established that's a separate universe, correct?
Yes, it is completely. And if you want to look at it more technically, it could be argued that Akiba Ranger is an alternate reality of our universe rather than an alternate reality of the Sentai universe.
Yeah, and of course nobody really argues about Akiba Ranger. Why? Because it is a separate Sentai.
The Akiba Ranger never crosses over into the main Sentai series. It remains unofficial.
Exactly. So, I mean, I think that's ultimately what I want to kind of get across in this discussion is that, again, I just want to avoid laziness and people who just don't like it. Right. But go ahead.
So, I guess my closing remarks on this topic is that I do not view it as laziness. I view it as giving writers freedom and flexibility. One of the complaints that filmmakers have when they are selected to write or direct for the Marvel Cinematic Universe is that they have rigid guidelines imposed on them. Mm-hmm. In fact, that's the reason that Kenneth Branagh did not... No, it wasn't Kenneth Branagh. It was that Jon Favreau did not want to return for Iron Man 3.
The director, right?
Yes.
Okay.
He directed Iron Man 1 and 2.
And that was Shane Black that did 3.
Yes.
Okay.
He stated that he did not want to return for Iron Man 3 because he was tired of Marvel constantly forcing details on them, forcing story bits on them. And perhaps that's not the best example because Marvel is trying to advance an overall plot line while Super Sentai is not.
It almost sounds like a screenwriting class that took place last semester from what you're describing. Because I've made the argument that I've been in screenwriting classes where I was in a basic class where I had restrictions on what I had to write. I had to write certain things. And I love that because I got a chance to come up with different stories. But then when you give complete freedom, and I've explained this to you, you end up with some crazy stuff that doesn't make a lot of sense.
You had restrictions in your screenwriting class. What were your restrictions?
Well, I mean, it's like I was given a premise and I had to write from that premise. Or like you can't use a time machine or you have to tell this type of story.
Yeah, you weren't allowed to have supernatural things.
But when I took advanced screenwriting,
yes,
our professor in that class let us write anything that we want. That's how I came up with my Floating Island story. That the one guy came with the story about 13-year-olds and drug dealers, and it was just a mess of different stories that you
when
had.
I took an advanced screenwriting class, I had a similar lack of restriction, and I came up with a film about it's like a post-apocalyptic film where humanity has been reduced to about one city by a nuclear accident, and a boy in the city discovers that not only does he work for the company responsible for the catastrophe, that they also accidentally created a giant raptor.
But the point was
that yes, freedom came up with crazy shit.
And that's the thing. I think you have to have restrictions in writing to come up with some stuff. You have to find creative ways to work around problems, and that's how you get good storytelling. Because even look at filmmaking by itself. Look at Jaws. I mean, that's the classic example, is it not? That they couldn't get the mechanical shark to work, so they had to film around that, and thus it made it more suspenseful. That's the argument I'm trying to go ahead and make, is you have to work around those problems, and more often than not, if you come up with a good solution, you're going to come up with a good product and better than what you originally intended.
Right. But I would argue that this does not, that the Jaws example you came up with does not apply to Sentai because the storyline of Jaws was not significantly altered by that fact.
Yeah, and I'm just talking about working around problems. And that's what I'm trying to say Sentai is. If they want to tell a story about dinosaurs and they want to go back to the extinction event and talk about it, You need to find a way to work around that problem that works for your story without violating other stories. Because I guess put yourself in the shoes of a writer.
Mm-hmm.
Say you're a writer on Zoo Ranger and you're a career writer in Japan. Just for example here. And you wrote this story and you're really good. It got you like an Emmy, an award of some kind, and then you went on to write bigger and better things, whatever.
Yeah.
Then somebody comes back 10 years later in Bio Ranger, and whatever story you wrote doesn't matter anymore. You've been completely your story was erased.
That's kind of just the game in Hollywood.
Well, and I understand that, but it's kind of like, to me, it's disrespecting what came before you as well.
No, I would say that it is respecting it. You are leaving it untouched. Instead of, say you're the Zoo Ranger writer
Mm-hmm.
now. Say you don't like the idea that Great Satan dragged an asteroid to Earth and created an alternate dimension. Say you don't like that idea.
Yeah.
So now your product has been defiled by these later retcons. For example, here's an example of a creator being unhappy with later retcons done.
Mm-hmm.
Jack Kirby.
Oh, Jack Kirby, yes.
Yes. He was unhappy with Marvel Comics. A later writer gave the Silver Surfer an origin story. In that he was...
with his wife and...
yeah, that he was...
Galactus, Kane,
that he
and
has,
Maze Herald, yeah.
Yeah. Jack Kirby preferred to think of him as a construct that Galactus just made.
Okay.
And that he was a tabula rasa, which was what contributed to his character arc and decision to betray Galactus. The reason that he was going to destroy the world was that he knew no other life, and that spending time amongst the Fantastic Four
mm-hmm.
helped him develop as a being and as a character to decide to destroy Galactus. Jack Kirby hated the idea of him having his own life before, because he felt that it seemed hypocritical for him to protect his own world and then sympathize with Earth, but not care about all those planets in between.
I like how we're getting so off topic a lot of times, because there's just a lot of great examples to go ahead and use.
And mine tend to be Marvel.
Yes,
Marvel.
Yes. We at least know where you lie in that. But I think, ultimately, let's go ahead and wrap this on up.
Yeah, because we're going all over the goddamn place.
Because I think ultimately we both set our points and all that. But let me ask this question going forward. When Tokyo Ranger comes out next month, you're going to look at that as an independent Sentai. You won't worry about what happened in Gokaiger. You won't worry what happened with Go Ranger, Jack, or anything. You're just going to look at this as a brand new universe that's sprung out of the tree of Sentai.
I'll worry about little continuity details when Tokyo versus Kyo Ranger comes out.
If it's in the movie continuity.
Yeah, and... So, but anyways, continue your question.
Yeah, that was pretty much my question. I think ultimately we're going to have to agree to disagree on this subject, but also agree that it's going to be up to other fans' interpretations, because I've seen people say that it's multiple timelines. I've heard from people think it's one timeline, but I think the community is probably just going to have to wait for officially from Toei to tell us yay or nay and what they think, I guess.
And I think Toei has given an unofficial nay, just by creating things that may contradict something prior established if they were in the same continuity.
Yeah. So
Toei seems to approach everything like a blank slate with each new season.
Yeah, and I tell you, to be a writer in that room and to speak Japanese would also be quite interesting, because that is my one question I would always ask of people who are doing franchises, whether they're writing or directing or working the third, fourth, fifth movie, something that was out 20 years ago, and they finally come up with a sequel or a spin-off series. I just ultimately want to know, because we as fans have our own way of how we want to go ahead and see it. The question is, how do they treat it? Because, of course, there are writers who look at it as a paycheck and others who look at it as a career and a craft.
And, I'm going to take a moment to admit that while I am defending Sentai's, I don't think right's the word, but...
Okay,
so it's defending Sentai's status of having different universes for each one. I'm completely guilty of trying to universe weld on Pokemon. Because some of the spin-offs are supposed to be separate universes.
Mhm.
Have you ever heard of Pokemon Mystery Dungeon?
I've heard, yes, because that's separate from the main continuity of games.
Because it's a world where only Pokemon exist. They're intelligent, have
Yeah.
their own culture and language, and that there are no humans.
Yeah, that's what I get for watching too many YouTube videos.
I made theories on how they could exist together.
Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with theories.
So I'm guilty of it. Just so it seems like I'm not a stickler who hates the idea of trying to put continuities together. I mean, you guys should hear my theory on how Neon Genesis Evangelion is a prequel to Gurren Lagann, but that's neither here nor there.
And that's why you're going to have your own channel. But Raptor, I want to thank you for joining me again. I just love discussions where we can get into the meat of stuff like
where
this.
we can disagree.
Absolutely. That's always fun for our listeners. But guys, tell us what you think. Do you think one universe separate, or do you have a completely out of left field theory that actually makes sense? Because I tell you, I've seen enough of those too.
Yeah, those are fun.
Yes, but let us know in the comments section. Otherwise, Raptor, again, thank you for joining us.
Always good to be here.
Everybody have a good night, and the tavern is now closed.